Check.
Okay. Well, I'm Gene Douglas. I came here to teach chemistry at UNC Pembroke back in 2005 to North Carolina. But I've taught chemistry for over 30 years since 1991. But I've been a Christian since 1973. And in some respects, because I got kind of forced into politics in 1985, I might as well tell you the little story because it's evidence of what is wrong with American politics. Because basically I was working as a chemist at A. Staley Manufacturing Company in Decatur, Illinois. Senator Daniel Inouye came to speak to their political action committee. And first he was, because I was a chemist there, involved in taste testing high fructose corn syrup to go Coke, Pepsi, and other foods at the time. Basically, Senator Daniel Inouye comes to say how grateful he was for ADM and Staley to give price supports for sugar to keep them high because it helped Hawaii sugar farmers. And I remember saying to a buddy next to me, he said, that makes no sense because essentially high fructose corn syrup is being prepared to replace sugar. And if the price of sugar is way high, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup is very low. Him coming in to say, I'm thankful for ADM and Staley because essentially and we're going to pay them billions of dollars to essentially prepare grain alcohol from the federal government, from your taxpayer money, going into grain alcohol. And essentially what that's going to do is decrease the cost of high fructose corn syrup even more. Well, basically I said to myself, that doesn't make sense. Then he went into a rant about how President Reagan must be impeached because he wasn't informing Congress what he was doing in Nicaragua. Because Senator Inouye was the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and they were very pissed that President Reagan was going around the War Powers Act to essentially ask the CIA to mine the harbors of Managua, Nicaragua, because the Soviet Union was actively bringing arms into Managua, Nicaragua at the time. This was 1985 or so. But basically, he was saying that Reagan should be impeached for what he was doing, not informing Congress. Well, unfortunately, I was reading National Review, which was a good magazine way back then under William F. Buckley. It's not anymore. But basically, the key thing was that in the National Review, they had said that the CIA report under Casey, had sent a report to his intelligence committee and said basically very clearly why they were doing it, because the Soviet Union was actively bringing arms into Managua. Well, basically, I raised my hand and said, Senator Inouye, what about the report that was sent to your committee last week? That the CIA was detailing why they were doing this. And he said, I didn't read it. Everybody laughed next to me, because if the Senate Intelligence Committee doesn't read it, then that must mean Reagan should be impeached, because he's not informing Congress. Well, he was. But then I found out later that because a lot of the audience laughed, that he tried to get me fired. And I thought that was very funny. Because I grew up in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. They have a college there that's related to Oberlin and Duke. And so basically, Swarthmore looks down on Duke, like they're beneath them. And so basically, the key thing was that I saw through the BS at the time, and I thought it was very funny that he tried to get me fired, because it didn't work. Well, in the meantime, I went to seminary, got my MDiv, thinking God was going to use me somehow, because my job kind of fizzled out because it was a venture group. And then in '91, I started teaching chemistry in Florida. Then I went out to Micronesia, and in Micronesia, we had hosted Cindy McCain and John McCain's and Cindy's son at our house for a spaghetti dinner. And basically I had a nice visit, and I kind of campaigned for Dole among the Americans who worked there in '96, and so we thought that was cool too. But then we moved to Hawaii in 1997 and found out the Hawaii sugar industry was destroyed. 12 years it took the Hawaii sugar industry to destroy because Coke, Pepsi, General Foods, Kraft Foods, essentially, all replaced sugar with high fructose corn syrup. So God was the American market for sugar from Hawaii. And essentially, a whole lot of people were thrown out of work. And I found out he was running for re-election, so I decided I was going to run for the U.S. Senate because Republicans were very weak too. That's why I wanted to come over here and meet you brave folks in Durham tilting at windmills, trying to get things to change. And basically, I decided that I would run for U.S. Senate. What was very funny for me is I went around the state and heard a lot of people getting support. I came in 3rd out of 9 in the primary. The first 2 were Democrats they put in so I wouldn't win. Mm-hmm. And then Senator McConnell told me he was very grateful that I got in because essentially he was very happy that basically millions of dollars were coming from the mainland to protect his seat. Well, then I did more of that on the same issues of which is in the brochure. But the point is, my wife got in there too, ran for Congress, and she won her primary and then ran against the pro-abort liberal Democrat who sponsored Hawaii vacations in the 60s to get a free abortion, or abortions in Hawaii. Well, basically she won as a pro-life, pro-family candidate against Patsy, got over 30% of the vote, 33% of the vote. But again, that's how we got involved in politics. Well, I retired from teaching chemistry. I moved up to Wake County and found out a modern version of Patsy Mink, feminist who was an ACLU person who essentially been working and contracting for Planned Parenthood for years, essentially was in Congress representing Wake County, not like Dan Bishop, who was my congressman down in Robeson County or Hudson or Rouser, but basically I came up to Wake to just be near my son and his family and found out I was in that. And basically because my wife died last July, went to be with the Lord, I realized after I saw the movie Sound of Freedom that I had a responsibility to get up and do something again. So I decided to run for Congress again on the same thing that you can read about. But basically the problem with Deborah Ross is not only is she a eugenicist, because the eugenics process essentially go back all the way to the 50s and even before then, they wanted to sterilize people of inferior races, sterilize the feeble-minded, and that includes blacks, Hispanics, and everybody else who isn't racist whites the way they're elite, Aryans almost. And Hitler absorbed the eugenics philosophy of the 20s into his pogroms. And basically the key thing is because she has been supportive of the eugenicist thing. And how do you think they sterilize girls and boys now instead of sterilizing black girls in the 50s? How do they do it now? Well, they provide trans drugs, so essentially change the sex with cutting off body parts or providing testosterone for girls or estrogen for guys that essentially kill sperm and eggs. So not only do they want to kill babies before birth, they want to prevent them getting born. But that's the classic eugenicist thing. So I'm running for Congress in the 2nd District to replace Deborah Ross. There's a worse version of your congresswoman here. Okay? So I'd appreciate your prayers. And if you know anybody in Wake who is just as concerned as you, please make copies of my brochure and send them to them, because we've got a big primary coming up also, where I feel I have responsibility to do the best I can. And my opponent, who's a retired colonel in the Army, has great credentials too, and he got the endorsement of the News and Observer. And that's the last thing I wanted, was the endorsement of the News and Observer, because I'd never gotten endorsed by liberal newspapers, particularly the McClatchy Group. And so it's the kind of thing where, I'm sorry, but Pastor Ashburn did not get endorsed by the News and Observer either. They just picked a no person and he's I like Deanna, so in a way it's like it was a pleasure to meet him today. But the point is, if there's any way you can help us in Wake, we will be glad to help you, because in some respects what we did in Wake County is we helped somebody win in the town commissioners last fall, because it was unaffiliated, no things, but basically one Republican won on the county commission, on the city commission for Wake Forest. And that was a big achievement for Wake County to have another Republican win. So I encourage you all to keep getting out there, annoy the Democrats because they're paranoid about losing power. They will spend all sorts of money freaking out, thinking money's going to save them. When in reality, the best thing you could do is say that your current Congresswoman and Deborah Ross want to destroy women's sports by supporting the